Hey, so welcome. This is episode 2 of the Knit McKinley Podcast. I'm Kara McKinley. I blog about knitting mostly and occasionally other crafts at theknitmckinley.com. And this is the second episode of what I'm hoping is a fairly regular but short podcast on knitting and yarn and all of the things that I am working on. So I released episode 1 just a few days ago on Monday, July 12th. I'm aiming to share, somewhere around 15 minutes of content, hopefully twice a week, just showing what I'm working on, what is going on over here, hopefully a little bit more detail about the designs and patterns that I share on my website, as well as some additional information. I've blogged for a number of years, and I think that video is going to be helpful to show a little bit more of what I'm doing and how my knits and the patterns really look, feel, as well as I'd really like to do more yarn reviews. I'd like to talk about the yarns I'm using, and I think that photos are great for that. You can find a couple of yarn reviews on my blog, but I think that video might help. So let's go ahead with episode 2. And today I have 3 yarns, 1 associated with a pattern update, 2 with a pattern that is now readily available, and a version you can do with some modifications that I played with some yarn with, which was really fun for me. I also have my project bag over here, which I needed to move to get to the other yarn. So I am also going to show you my work in progress. I have wanted just for me knit, and I think I will go ahead and blog about this and share the pattern recipe because it is a really easy project. But I've wanted a new scarf in my collection, something simple, maybe stripy, very fall colored. So I had done a striped mandala DK scarf, Lion Brand's mandala yarn, a little bit ago for my mom in their wizard colorway, which is beautiful and vibrant and has like pinks and purples and yellows and these really bright colors. Well, I also saw this centaur colorway, and this is fabulous and totally up my alley. So let's see if I can hold this out. I'm about a third of the way through, and all I am doing is a super simple garter stitch diagonal scarf. So this is my current work in progress. I talked a little bit about the experience of using this yarn with the Wizard 2-stripe scarf when I did that blog post. I might talk a little bit more about using the yarn for this pattern when I'm done and when I, might have more fully formed thoughts. But that is my current work in progress. It's a little bit weird because I have that and I have like a plain vanilla sock, and right now I actually don't have anything else on my needles, and that feels weird because I am a very multi-project crafter. I love the process of knitting, and I like to have projects in lots of different phases. So I have something to take in the car, like a plain vanilla sock, so that I have something that requires a little bit more attention when I need to, focus on my knitting, because that's a really, that's one of the things I love about knitting, is focusing and creating something beautiful and intricate, as well as something a little more mindless. The garter stitch scarf absolutely fits that bill. And I usually have a couple hat patterns on the needles, and I don't right now. It's strange for me. Although the 3 yarns that I intend to be the focus of this blog post, podcast, whatever we're going to call this, are actually all hat patterns, because I don't just swatch yarn. I tend to knit hats with new to me yarns. I do a lot of community and charity knitting, plus I have a large hat collection. I love to give hats. So oftentimes in lieu of knitting a swatch, I will knit a hat of some kind. So let's dive in and talk about the 3 yarns that I'm really excited to share my experience with. So the first yarn is one that is been on the market for a couple of years at this point. It is Harvest Worsted by Urth Yarns. Urth Yarns does these beautiful 2-ball sock kits where you get 2 matching striped balls, so you can do 2 matching striped socks. I love it. So I was in the process of updating the Otterbein hat pattern, and I wanted to find another worsted weight yarn to knit a sample with. So I went over to the Mermaid's Pearl, which is a local to me here in Rhode Island yarn shop, and I found on their wall this Harvest Worsted yarn, and I was so excited about it. because I was, I think, predisposed to like yarns by this brand. So this is in the colorway Time. It is a 100% extra fine superwash merino. It's worsted weight. Each ball has 220 yards. It recommends a 6 to 8 US knitting needle or a 4 to 5 millimeter. I did US size 7 for this hat. That is actually what the pattern calls for. It's the Otterbein hat pattern, but let me show you the ball first. Well, the remains of the ball. This is what I had left after I finished knitting my hat. It's a slightly messy, tiny ball. And I ended up knitting a swatch in addition to the hat because the hat's gorgeous. I'll show that in a moment. But I really wanted to show the neat tonality of the color. And this Time colorway, and I think this is true of most of their yarns, they do a beautiful job of just blending together beautiful, beautiful tonal colors. And so you can see it, it reads almost as silver in the direct light. It's got the beautiful, almost edging towards charcoal, but not quite charcoal. It's really gorgeous. So while I was knitting the hat, not the swatch, but when I was knitting the hat, which, I sat and knit in just about 2 sittings, I realized that I was getting some discoloration on my fingers, I think from the yarn. And so what's interesting is when I went ahead and I did a wool wash and blocked the hat, I did not have any color bleeding into the water. I use Eucalyptus, so very gentle cleanser. I did not have any discoloration, but I did have a little bit of the friction color on my thumbs. So this is the Otterbein hat. I absolutely adore this pattern. I've wanted to update it. So when I talk about updating my patterns, my older patterns were very simply written in Microsoft Word. I now have the ability to do more things, including adding charts, and I have a current template that I like to use. So the Otterbein hat is got a brim where you've got the twisted stitch columns, and then you have 1x1 rib. The 1x1 rib transitions into the cable, so you keep working those ribs up until you finish the first round of cable repeats. You do more cables, and the reason I'm showing this on a head form is because I want to turn it around and angle it a little bit, and I want to show the crown. So I mentioned a little bit in my first podcast that I like it when hats don't just go and, just have an angle up to the drawstring or whatever closure is used at the top. I really like hat shaping to be deliberate and thoughtful, and so what I've done here is the cables come in towards the center with those twisted stitch columns, and then it all comes in towards the middle. And I have to tell you, if you're watching this is actually a really strange position to hold a hat in. But I think it's the best way to sort of show what's going on with the crown. And yeah, I think that people see crowns, right? Like, you may think, oh, it's the top of my head. I'm not going to see it, but the people around you see it. So I really like the whole hat to have a good, thoughtful knitting experience. So this is the hat knot on the hat form. I'd also knit a sample in some deep stash I had, Mad Tosh, which I'm only going to show just to show the contrast between 2 different colors. And I do not any longer have the label for this beautiful green on the left, but I just, you look at hat patterns and so often it's like, oh, well, if I knit this hat, it's going to look a certain kind of way. And the yarn you pick, the color you pick will really change the look and feel of a hat. So this hat is, a deep sort of color experience. Oh, it's getting a little overexposed thanks to the natural light. Let me see. Well, that's okay. And then you have, on the other hand, this beautiful, almost glowing silver. And it's so interesting the way you can pick a different yarn and your hat experience will be different. So as far as the yarn goes, the Urth yarn was a just wonderful knitting experience. I couldn't be happier with the quality of it. Yes, I was probably predisposed to like the yarn because I already liked their sock yarns. But I'm really happy with it. Would highly recommend if you're looking for like a special gift. This is a really just in person, it just looks like a beautiful, beautiful yarn. If you're knitting a sweater or a garment, I think that this is something that would be great next to skin. It just is an incredibly soft wool. It's an extra fine superwash merino. I thought I was making up the superwash part for a moment and needed to check the label. So even if you need to end up washing it for some reason, although, wool, 100% wool, magical properties, it's something that you could wear and just have like a wonderful, wonderful experience with. So that is the Urth Yarn Harvest Worsted. Very much enjoyed that. The next yarn I'm going to talk about, and this is funny, you're going to see me like bringing 3 more skeins across the camera because I really liked these yarn colors. So this is a yarn that came out last year. It is a collaboration Lion branded with a designer. I think she's mostly crochet. I keep admiring her patterns and I fall for the crochet ones. She does have some knit patterns, but I feel like it was more crochet heavy. And so this collaboration is called Hue and Me. It is in a bunch of different sort of beautiful colors that all go together just in a superb way. So what I ended up buying was the Magic Hour, the Ozone, which is like a lighter blue, the Fatigues, which is like an olive green. It's a lighter green. I don't think I like olive. You generally think of being a little bit deeper and maybe a little bit richer, but I mean, it's distinctly green. I would qualify it as olive. And then the last color is the one I actually knit my cat sample out of, and it's called Peachy Dogwood, and I like it because it's just this very subtle, almost blush pink, and it's just really beautiful. So what I did was I'd actually cast on a couple times. I don't know what I was thinking. I cast on for the ribbed part of the hat using size 10.5 knitting needles. 10.5 knitting needles are what they recommend. You usually want to go down a size if you're doing like a 1x1 rib just to keep your stitches tidy and tight. So I ripped that out. I went and I cast on using a size 10 needle, and then I switched to the 10.5 for the body of the hat. And this is an adaptation of the beacon hat. The beacon hat is a pattern I released on January 1st, and I did show a version of this I did in Magic Hour in that first podcast episode, but this is to sort of talk about the yarn experience, yarn review here. And what I think was really good about this yarn is I felt like there was a gap in Lion Brand's line of yarns. This is an 80%, 20% wool. It is a bulky weight. It's US 10.5 knitting needles. And for knitters that have been out there for a while, maybe you'll remember, it might have been the Woolies line. I feel like there was a Woolies yarn in between the worsted and the thick and quick that was chunky weight. It was an 80-20 blend. And it went away for a while. And for a while, I feel like there wasn't a good wool blend, chunky weight yarn by Lion Brand. And they've had a few like Hometown and the Color Made Easy. Hometown just reads really shiny to me. I don't particularly care for it. The Color Made Easy I actually did like because it had a very smooth ply, but it was 100% acrylic, and I do actually prefer that there be at least a tiny bit of wool content in most of my yarns. So for this, I took the Peachy Dogwood, I took the Beacon Hat pattern. I'm going to have a link in the blog post below, but basically the regular adult size of the Beacon Hat pattern has you cast on 48 stitches. I cast on 64. I did a 1x1 rib using my US 10s before switching to a US 10.5 for the 1x1 rib pattern. For the 1/2 cable pattern. I did an extra repeat of the cables compared to the original, and then I did end up adding a row to the crown decreases. And this has worked out to be just about perfect. It's just about 8.5 inches tall. It stretches pretty well to fit my 21.5 inch head perfectly. All in all, just really happy with this. Also, and forgive the little bit of editing right there, I had to go and help my dog remember that the mailman is friend, not foe. So there was a little bit of barking, so ignore the little bit of editing that just happened. This is such a great yarn. I think that one of the things I would recommend is if you're looking at it closely, you can see pretty good stitch definition. You can pick up a little bit of the fuzziness. I'm just sort of moving it slowly in hopes that the camera will pick that up. But the colors, the palette, the yarn itself, all very good in terms of appearance, all great to work with. I'm really excited about playing with these other colors because, like I said, I love a good fall color palette. And so I did. I bought all 4 colors. I'm excited to do a couple of additional hats with that yarn in particular. And I think that when working with it, I would definitely recommend accessories, a bulky weight sweater. I want to do anything where you've got like a super complex, like very twisting, interlocking full cable panels, or like lace work where you're really going to rely on your stitch definition in parts because it's acrylic, so 80% acrylic, so the amount that you can block it is going to be a little bit limited. And also it's just a chunky weight, so you may just have a little bit of trouble getting the yarn to behave the way you might want with a really complex pattern. But for showing off the colors, for showing off, you know, simpler stitches and cable and lace patterns, I think it's a really great option. I'm really excited about working with that yarn a little bit more, which leads us to our third yarn. So the third yarn is brand new by Lion Brand, and it is Re-Spun. So Re-Spun is part of their sustainable stitching line, and it's labeled thick and quick. And I will emphasize that because it was my error in thinking that this was going to behave exactly like the thick and quick yarn. And one of the things I would want to make sure you know is that this doesn't behave exactly the way the thick and quick Woolies yarn does. So this is a super bulky yarn. It's 100% polyester. It's all from recycled fibers. The color that I got was Wisteria, which is just this beautiful blushish, almost has like a little bit of purple, but it's just beautiful and blush. And it calls for US 13 needles, and the suggested gauge is 10 stitches per inch and 14 rows, which again I share because that is pretty much exactly what the Woolies Thick and Quick calls for. So I went ahead and knit the beacon hat, and I was just showing the beacon in the peachy dogwood Hue and Me yarn. So this is the beacon as the pattern was originally published for, and again, links in the description box below. And so this was my Re-Spun beacon hat. So there are some things I love. I love the color. I love the feel of it. It's really soft. There's a couple things that I think it's almost like a little bit of like a user beware. Let me see if I can get this up close enough that you'll be able to see. I think you can actually see it on the right side. This isn't just overexposed. You can see that the yarn is actually very fuzzy. And it's fuzzy on the skein. So you can actually see there's halo. You can see, I think, the halo. And it feels pretty loosely plied. So first of all, I just went ahead and cast on and knit. I didn't actually do a gauge swatch first. But as I mentioned, oftentimes with new yarns, I will just go ahead and knit a hat, especially if I'm just playing and experimenting. A hat like this takes me about 90 minutes to knit. That's really not so far off what a gauge swatch would take. And this way I actually have a finished project I got to hold up. So this is the Re-Spun in the beacon hat pattern, and it did come out smaller. I think you can kind of see that this just doesn't look quite as wide as, say, the Hue and Me version. And the Hue and Me version did come out the same size as the beacon that I have in my collection. So for this yarn, I loved the colors that they had at my local Joann Fabrics. I looked online. I actually think my local Joann's ended up with all the colors. The whole palette is just beautiful. They're very earth tony. They're solid colors. They're not tonal or anything like that. They're just a solid color, but they're very pretty. I really want to love this yarn. I really want to love the concept of it. It comes in like these big skeins, which would be really fun if you're, learning to knit, or a beginner knitter who is like, ooh, so I can buy a really big skein of yarn and knit myself a scarf without, tying on loose ends, tying two skeins together, that kind of thing. This is 223 yards, so it wouldn't be a huge scarf, but you could definitely get a little project out of this. And again, I loved the colors. I just am not 100% in love with the quality. And when a yarn feels like it's a little bit looser spun and it has this kind of fuzz to it, I worry about how well the yarn will hold up to wearing. So, I wear my hats, I'm out walking the dog and doing whatever else, and I wear a hat. I love my hats. I love my hat collection. So I would be worried about this holding up over the long run. I don't know that I would want to recommend a garment on it. It just feels like this is not going to hold up to a lot of wear. But perhaps for accessories, perhaps for something if you're going to be a gentler wearer of it. Because again, the colors are gorgeous, and conceptually, I love the idea of this yarn. I do also want to go ahead and give it a second chance. I don't want to be like, well, I did my beacon pattern and it didn't come out, because I should play to the yarn's strength with pattern attempts. So this isn't in the beacon. If you're going to do the beacon in it, I would probably say go ahead and go up a needle size, do the size 15, or, of course, gauge swatch. But all in all, mixed review on this one, I think, is what we'll go with. Mixed review on our, let me hold this up the right way, yep, on our Lion brand Re-Spun Thick and Quick. A little bit of a higher, more positive review on our Hue and Me yarn. I'm really actually excited about these two blues in particular. I just think that this is a really great yarn that fills a bit of a gap that had existed in Lion brand yarn lineup. And then the Harvest Worsted is just absolutely gorgeous. So if you're looking for a yarn to knit a special project out of, that is just going to be gorgeous and a pleasure to knit with. I don't think I could say enough good things about the Urth yarn. And I'm sorry that I don't have any just hanging out in stash, because I would have happily pulled out one of their 2-ball sock sets that I mentioned earlier. Highly recommend, if you are a sock knitter, checking out the Urth Yarns sock lines. They sell single, the 100-gram put-ups, but you can also get these two 50-gram balls, and they are just a lot of fun because you can make matching striped socks, which is, well, most of my socks are not striped in any way that matches, and I'm generally okay with that. It's the novelty of it, and the yarn is just really great quality and holds up well. So these are the 3 yarns I'm working with. There will be a link in the description box below for a blog post with a little more information about these yarns, as well as where to get the beacon hat pattern, where to purchase the Otterbein pattern. Please if you enjoyed this video. I'd also love any comments or feedback on it. Again, this is episode 2 of what I'm hoping becomes a fairly short but twice weekly yarn podcast. So thanks so much. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I hope you have time to make something fun.